Welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Well, on November 5th, the 45th President of the United States got elected again as its 47th President. Donald Trump won a convincing victory, and the Republicans will take over Senate control as well. To discuss this, we are joined by Suren Sargsyan, founder of the Center for American Studies in Yerevan. Welcome back, Suren. Good talking with you again.
Ողջույն, Suren.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Suren, we want to look at the coming Trump presidency, especially given some of the things he has said about Ukraine, the Middle East, and of course about Armenia and Artsakh. Trump will take office on January 20th. He will be sworn in. So there are about 70 to 75 days until then. But first, let's take a look at the previous few months in the campaign, because I want to see how the campaign was perceived among Armenians, including those in Armenia. As we discussed with Harut Sasunyan in episode 380, you can go back and listen to that one if you'd like, this election was somewhat polarizing and emotional. Most voters already knew whom they would vote for, where potential support or their Armenia as part of their program meant very little. Furthermore, Armenians suffered as a result of the policies of both administrations, so there wasn't a clear choice to endorse in terms of historic performance. And these are the reasons that I believe the ANCA chose to withhold its endorsement for president. So let's ask questions about the campaign process. What's the view from the Republic of Armenia? Was it right for the ANCA to withhold its endorsement?
Well, I cannot say whether it's right or wrong for ANCA, but I suppose it was a wise decision to do so. This is my personal view. Maybe some people will disagree with me, but what we have now, we had two candidates. We had Kamala Harris, vice president for Biden. And during this administration, we had ethnic cleansings in Artsakh, which is obvious. And we also had Trump as a president when Artsakh was attacked brutally by Azerbaijan. So we actually have the situation where under one administration, Artsakh was attacked. Under the second administration, there were ethnic cleansings. So I suppose, taking this into account, ANCA did the right choice not to support any of the candidates during the presidential campaign.
Yeah, we seem to agree on that. Were you able to monitor the elections and how they were covered, especially in Armenia? For instance, it's very interesting how pro-government and opposition media covered the elections. And also, are there any public surveys that would indicate how ordinary people in Armenia perceive both Trump and Harris?
To tell you frankly, I did not see any public survey about the outcome of the presidential elections in the US. I didn't see that one. Maybe there were some private or so-called closed surveys, but I haven't seen anything like that publicly. And to tell you frankly, I suppose that in Armenia, like in other countries, people are thinking that, there are two types of people. People who support Harris and people who support Trump because of different policies, because of their own beliefs and political, religious views, etc. So there are liberals, and of course they support Harris administration, Biden, Harris administration, and of course Harris. And there are other people who support Trump because of different views. So I suppose in Armenia, people were like 50-50, supporting Harris and supporting Trump. So there were no big difference here. And I suppose the same with the Armenian diaspora in the US. So there is no clear answer whether Armenian community in the US voted for Trump or Harris, because we know that the people, the Armenians who are voting in the United States, they are American citizens, first of all. And they, of course, live in the United States. And they're, of course, first of all, thinking about their well-being, thinking about their social issues, security issues, border issues, and different other issues that both parties were bringing up during the campaign. So that is why I suppose there's no clear answer to that. And at the same time, again, coming to our previous topic, under one administration, Artsakh was attacked. Under the other one, it was ethnically cleansed. So Armenians are, I suppose, thinking the same way. And that is why they have some other priorities on why and who to vote for.
Yeah, I think I'm largely in agreement with what you said, but I have to mention a few things. I wasn't able to objectively monitor the entire media spectrum in Armenia, But the random like spot checks that I did, for instance, when I check an opposition channel such as Factor TV, who has mostly liberal and foreign NGOs, foreign funded NGO guests, the content of those interviews is going to be clear, especially when they are asked about US elections. And opposition media, I'm not sure. They were all around the place. But what was surprising to me is the public TV's coverage of this campaign. There may be other instances, but in the week leading up to the elections, or maybe 2 weeks, maybe 10 days, I found two interviews. There may be more on the topic, but one on the prominent interview spot with Petros Ghazaryan, and this was with Viken Hovsepian, who was advocating pro-Harris positions. And on that slot, the interview with Petros Ghazaryan, there was no alternative presented in any other days that I monitored, like in the 10 days. And then also during the day, they had programming where they had these unknown people, to me, talk about how the diaspora should vote for Harris. Was that my subjective perception that the public TV was, whether inadvertently or whether, on purpose, covering the elections in the US in a slanted manner?
Well, that's a very, very important and very interesting question to understand whether there was a position of Armenian government in that regard, because public TV is a TV that the Armenian diaspora is watching in the United States. So it has a world coverage, and in LA, in New York, and other states, a lot of Armenians are watching public TV, which is the TV channel with the biggest coverage in the United States. And so when a lot of people are watching this, you're giving some signals from Yerevan, and they know this is a signal coming from Yerevan. Well, they are considering that this is the best scenario for Yerevan. And sometimes they may be going and voting, taking into account what messages they get from official Yerevan, which is very important. Very important.
Yeah. So and we have to be clear that officially the government obviously said that they would work with both candidates. But I have to clarify that public TV in Armenia is not like public TV in the US, where it's more or less independent from the administration. Public TV is very much in the control of the Pashinyan regime through the various different oversight bodies that they have set up.
It's actually funded by the state budget, by the government, technically. So, of course, who's paying? That one is ordering music, as we're saying, right? So,
yes,
that's a very important issue that we have to think about. And another issue that I'll bring here is that Armenia's ambassador to Washington, D.C., she was invited actually to both conventions, to Republican and to a Democratic convention. When she went to the Republican convention, she just gave a little sort of press release on Facebook saying that she was there, she was invited, as other ambassadors were invited, etc. But when she went to the Democratic convention, she brought a delegation from Armenian parliament. And the delegation went there, and they were doing a huge PR here. They were doing a campaign here that we were there. We had a lot of meetings. It was very interesting, etc. Yes, quite probably the delegation was invited by Dems, but it was not invited by GOP. That's quite possible. But even at that point, as an ambassador, she had to understand that she has to be very careful, because this could be understood as support to one of the parties. And it actually, a lot of people were thinking that, okay, if the government is having this position, that means that they want us as Armenians living in the United States to vote for Harris, for Democrats. So these kind of things are very important to take into consideration when you're making that kind of decisions, because it's not about who you support, it's about the country that, you have to work with, whoever wins there. And this was very unprofessional, I suppose.
In the final week before his election, Trump made a social media post on his Truth Social platform saying that 120,000 Armenian Christians were horrifically persecuted and forcibly displaced in Artsakh, and that he will protect persecuted Christians and will work to stop the violence and ethnic cleansing, and he will also restore peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Sorry if my Trump was terrible, guys.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I second that Trumpism, yes.
him reading his own personal truth, yeah.
Well, The funny thing is, just when we thought that he was done pandering for the Armenian vote, he called up Aram I in Antilias, Lebanon, and had a discussion with him as well. Suren, why was Trump emphasizing the Christian angle on the whole thing? He talks about persecuted Christian Armenians. He calls up our Christian spiritual leader. Why did he call Aram Vehapar instead of, for example, Maguns, whom you just mentioned in Washington, D.C., or the ANCA, or even more importantly, Karekin Vehapar in Echmiadzin, or Pashinyan in Yerevan? What was the purpose of calling Aram Vehapar?
Okay, let's start from the beginning here, because there were a lot of questions actually, and these two, the statement and the truth that he wrote on his platform I think they're both very important. I'll tell you why. First of all, let's start with the truth. Of course, we understand that this is campaign, and they are giving promises to community, to Armenians who are living in the U.S., especially in swing states. Not that much, not too many Armenians living in the seventh swing state, but still there are a lot of Armenians living there, and their voices could be very important for Trump because, the numbers were very close between Harris and Trump in swing states, including Pennsylvania. So, of course, we have an election process here, and we have to understand that this is a process that every candidate, usually when they need Armenian votes here or there, they are giving promises to recognize genocide, etc. But now we have a different situation. First of all, he used the term Artsakh, which is never used by the Armenian government. Armenian officials are scared to use that word.
Right.
And he is using that word. Second, he is using the term, which is a legal term, ethnic cleansings, right?
Yes.
Which is very important to compare what Armenian government is using. They are not using these terms at all. They're scared to use that term against Azerbaijan.
And doesn't it have implications at the International Court of Justice level?
Yeah, of course. But let's start to think about what Trump was thinking when he was doing his statements. When you have these two words, at least these two words in terms to use in your text, you have to find a messenger on how to deliver this text to Armenian community. You cannot call Pashinyan and give these messages through Pashinyan because Pashinyan is not bearing this, this.
He's not receptive to it.
Yeah,
that's
of course.
right.
He doesn't need that words. This is number one. Number two, of course, Trump knows. Not Trump, but his team. They know that Armenian government is having a hard time with the Armenian church. And they are choosing to give this message via church, which is, again, very important thing. Why Aram Catholicos and not Garigin, as you asked me? Because Aram Catholicos was in the United States when they were preparing to make the call. I don't know physically if he was in the US when they had this phone conversation or he was already back. But again, I think Aram Catholicos, because of his influence not only in Armenia, in Armenian church, but also in Lebanon. Because we all know what is happening in Lebanon. So this was a message to a lot of interested parties, as we call it. So basically, this tweet, of course, again, it's a pro-election process, and we know why these things are coming up during the campaign. But again, this is giving a good opportunity for our community in the U.S. to work on with upcoming administration, including, Armenian community, including our lobbyists, our different organizations, and the church to work with this administration. If we want to, let's say, recognize ethnic cleansings as a legal fact, let's say adopt a resolution by House or Senate. This is a very good starting point. Of course, again, it's a campaign, but again, we have a very good start. President is using these terms. Let's work on it. And let's recognize, first of all, the ethnic cleansing, the fact of ethnic cleansings, and then move on to understand what's going to happen next. I think this is very important for our community. Armenian government is not going to do anything about it. So forget about it. Forget about the embassy. Forget about the ambassador.
Right.
She was just trying, during this whole time, we're doing monitoring, we're just trying to see what is she doing there. What is Azerbaijan ambassador doing there, comparing, etc. But we noticed that she's trying to escape Republicans. And this is very unprofessional. This is highly unprofessional. Even if you don't like them, even if you think that they are bad for Armenia, even if you think so, you have to work with them. Because look what is Israel doing. Look what is Prime Minister of Israel doing. She's coming to the United States, having meeting with both candidates. Of course, he has some preferences, but just in case, he's meeting everyone, talking about the importance of Israeli-American relations. And we have something unprofessional, very unprofessional here.
Yeah.
With
Suren,
Armenian ambassador, and the Armenian government, actually.
Thank you for picking up on those extremely important points about the use of the word Artsakh and the use of the words ethnic cleansing. I was actually going to ask you exactly where those things came from. Now, you're also saying that he is trying to put a differentiation between his relations with the Republic, Armenia, and also the diasporan community, the Armenian-Americans. Do you have any suggestions as far as strategy goes, how Armenian-Americans should engage Trump on these issues?
Very, very important question again. Well, the foreign policy of Trump's second administration is going to be very different from what we have during his first administration, because new world order, new realities, new challenges around the globe. So when people are saying that he's going to isolate himself from the world, isolate the United States from the world processes, no, this is something else. We have a different situation. Besides that, he missed 4 years, which means that the U.S. foreign policy under Biden went too far. This is a new world if you compare with what he left when he was leaving the White House in 2020. So basically, we have a new situation in the world, and he has to be engaged. First of all. Second, he's saying that he is going to be a peacemaker, peace builder, etc. And this is also very important because he has an agenda. That means he has an agenda in foreign policy, and his priority is to build peace between countries, including Israel and Arab world, probably including Israel and Iran. Let's see what's going to happen. He's again talking about the solving of the Ukrainian crisis. He said, like, I'm going to solve it in like a day or two. So basically, let's wait and see how he's going to do that, because it's a very hard thing to do, but still, we have his promise. Let's see how he's going to deliver that one. And of course, it's going to be very different from whatever we had. And of course, it's going to be very different for Armenia too. I mean, for the South Caucasus. If the Ukrainian crisis is solved, Russia is having more resources, free resources, to come back and to be engaged in South Caucasus, which he technically lost when he was in war with Ukraine. And the American foreign policy, they saw that there's a gap here. And they, of course, started to act more actively. So when Russians are free, I suppose they're going to come back and try to have their own game here.
Suren, you mentioned Ukraine, and Trump has said that he will resolve the Ukraine war within a day, and possibly before even taking office. We don't know if that clock starts counting down since when he's elected, or if we have to.
No, I think he just says
he
says when I started, it will take me a day. So
he's actually just had conversations with Zelensky today about the conflict.
So let's say by January 21st, we should expect some results. I say that jokingly, obviously. If he's able to do even a dent, that's an improvement on Biden-Harris. But he has threatened to stop both funding Ukraine with billions in military aid, like Biden has, or supply them with more if Putin doesn't stop. But he also says he wants a win-win agreement and an end to war. And in fact, there were some proposals floating around today being presented as potentially like official offers for truce in Ukraine that I believe plan to freeze the situation for 20 years, essentially like no NATO membership for Ukraine in 20 years. But after that, it's possible. I don't know if that is an official proposal, but media were spreading that. But all that aside, whether he takes 1 day to solve it or 100, what are Trump's goals in Ukraine? And how does he want the conflict to end? And also, does he want the Europeans, potentially, does he want to offload the issue to Europeans, or does he actually want to solve the conflict?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that the United States is the main provider of foreign assistance to the Ukraine, and we're not talking about the military assistance. We're also talking about other different types of assistance going through USAID, etc. So even if he stops financing Ukraine, he still has something to push on Russia because of the sanctions. He can discuss that issue with Putin too, like, if you agree on this, I will lift some sanctions. If you don't agree with that, I will not lift sanctions, etc. So it's not that he only has It doesn't mean that he has instruments only against Ukraine. He also has some instruments against Russia. And Russians are open to discuss it. As Putin said today, he congratulated Trump, and he said that he's open to communicate with him. I suppose we will see a phone conversation or some letter from Trump to Putin in upcoming days, because, I think it's obvious that they have to talk, because Trump is still thinking that war in Ukraine started because of Biden, and if he was in the office, it would never start. And he's saying, okay, I will come and solve this problem very fast. It's going to take a very short period of time for me to solve it. So that is why I suppose he has some instruments to push on both parties to come to a conclusion. Not necessarily it's going to be a losing situation for Ukraine or Russia. Maybe they will find some solution acceptable for two parties, and I suppose it's possible for both societies, to accept it as a, win-win situation. So I'm sure there are some mechanisms that they can use, the American diplomats can use here.
And also during the campaign, Trump had revived his talk about leaving NATO and criticism that U.S. is bearing the burden of NATO funding. Is this a real plan, or was it a negotiation tactic to get Europe to step up and share the cost of the alliance?
Well, he had 4 years to quit NATO, but he did not. So I suppose this is a pressure on NATO to give more finance to this organization. And to tell you frankly, I don't think he's going to leave NATO, but I suppose he will most probably try to bring more money from other countries. I think this is his strategy. He's strategic, but I don't think he's going to leave NATO. At the same time, I think he will most probably have other countries, other allies in other regions of the world, like some organizations maybe, or non-formal allies against China, which is, again, it's not the priority for NATO to confront China, but this is a priority for Trump to confront China, because they think that China is a big threat, because China is becoming a next global superpower. And this is challenging the United States. So maybe this will be something else. Of course, if he engaged in other organizations, it will, minimize his role in NATO, but I suppose he's not going to leave it.
It's interesting you should mention China, because that was exactly the next question I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So the future Trump administration's stance on Ukraine is clear. We know that in general, the hawks, the conservatives, see China as the number one peer competitor, if not potential enemy. There's talk about, war with China in 3 to 4 years and so forth. But if the U.S. plans to continue a war of attrition on Russia, they will need to remove China from the picture, because I think China is doing a lot to help Russia in terms of purchasing energy resources. But at the same time, I think this is like a prisoner's dilemma, maybe, where, both Russia and China are the prisoners, and if they act against one and the other, they both might lose. But at least that's my perception. But how does China exactly figure in this conflict and in Trump's plan for resolution of the conflict, and also future policies? Like if Trump is inimical to China, then China and Russia stick together. So how does he split Russia and China together, from each other?
Yeah, this is very interesting how he's going to do that, because of course he understands if he's putting too much pressure on both of them, they definitely have to cooperate because they have no other choices, right? But anti-Russian sanctions are mainly economic sanctions and financial sanctions. But the sanctions that they have against China, they're not economic, because U.S. and Chinese economies are, so connected, so interconnected, that it's really very hard to put sanctions against them, not to hurt the U.S. itself. So they are putting different sanctions against China, like sort of, it's a sanction against the abusement of human rights, minority rights, religious minorities, etc. So this is different types of sanctions. But I suppose that the U.S. understands, and of course it's a fact, that China is number 2 economy in the world. In some places it's even number 1, but Russia is like very far from being in the top 10, I suppose, at this moment. So basically priority for them is to confront China, not Russia, first of all. Maybe they will try to, with President Xi, they will try to come to sort of a conclusion on how to end this competitiveness that Trump thinks is not fair. And this trade war should be concluded somehow, should be ended. somehow. I think that there will be a big negotiation between these two parties, and I think Xi will be one of the first leaders that Trump will be engaged, or his administration will be engaged with.
Suren, Trump is all in on Netanyahu, Israel, and the right to defend lingo. But a greater regional threat looms as Israel has tried to draw Iran into a direct state-to-state confrontation and involve the U.S. militarily in the region as well. But it is said that behind the scenes, Trump is pushing Netanyahu to wind down the wars in Gaza and Lebanon. Once again, what are Trump's foreign policy goals in this region, the Middle East?
Well, again, we had two different statements on that. He's saying that he wants to bring peace, and he has to support Israel because Israel is number one ally of the United States, of course. So two different approaches. How you make a deal, you negotiate it, or you force for the peace. You force peace enforcement, or we call it a peace enforcement, right? So how he's going to do that is really very hard to say at the moment. But my perception, at least for what we have now, is that Trump will try to help Israel while trying not to escalate the situation in the Middle East, at least against Iran, because he's trying to position himself as a person who is a deal maker. And he's saying that under my administration, no war ever started, etc. But if the war starts under his administration, there's going to be another disaster, for the Middle East, for both Israel and Iran. Of course, we understand that. It's really hard to say at the moment, but we need to have some more statements coming from Trump on that issue, because I think the Middle East is going to be one of his main concerns. During his first presidency, he was not very much interested in other parts of the world, like, let's say, the South Caucasus. But he was very much interested and engaged in the Middle East. And, that he brought peace between some of Arab countries and Israel. By the end of his term, we know that he started his first trip from that part of the world. So basically what we have now is, I think we have to wait. Yeah, we have to wait to see what is his position going to be on that. And I think he will talk about it as soon as he has a chance.
Yeah, we know that Trump is not a big fan of Iran. He pulled out of the JCPOA during his first presidency. What are his plans in Iran's direction, and how do Azerbaijan and Armenia figure in U.S. strategy, do you think?
Well, if we're talking about national security strategy, our region has never been there. Only it was just mentioned once under Biden administration. This is 1996, I think. And for Biden, South Caucasus was an important place. It's not like, vital for the United States, but still it's an important place. And he, in his national security strategy, he mentions that the United States has to do everything to solve conflicts in the South Caucasus. So the solving conflict in the South Caucasus means Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. This was a priority for him, but, in this region, I think the same is going to happen with Trump. Because, the Biden administration did a very, very, very big job on being a mediator between Armenia and Azerbaijan, And the letters of Biden to President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan was about that. Guys, we did this work. We've done a lot of work. We agreed on a lot of issues. Even if not everything is solved, let's sign whatever we have now. This was the main message coming from the White House, because he wants to leave a legacy. Biden wants to leave a legacy that he's solved at least one conflict. And because under his administration, huge conflicts erupted, right? It was like Ukraine, it was Israel, Lebanon, Gaza, it was a withdrawal from Afghanistan disaster, and he wants to leave something as his legacy, as something he achieved, his deal. And he would be extremely happy to have both leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan in the White House signing something. And he's backing it, like a godfather, as I call it, of the peace agreement. But I think it's not going to happen. But, the U.S. cannot leave it like that. Okay, we achieved this moment and this part of the agreement or negotiation. So, okay, we're out. They have to continue somehow to bring to a logical conclusion of this process, or just leave it to some other mediators that might appear pretty soon. That could be most probably Russia. So let's wait and see what is Trump foreign policy going to look like. But I'll tell you something that we did not discuss during your previous question. We have some people around Trump that are having very pro-Armenian positioning.
Right, that's true.
That's first of all, that's Kennedy. He is talking about Artsakh. He's talking about ethnic cleansings. He's talking about Armenians. He's giving interviews to Armenians. He's a very good friend of the Armenian community in the United States.
As is Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yes, that's Kennedy is number one. Vivek is number two. If you remember the interviews of Vivek during the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh, he was like, he was just shouting, guys, we need to do something. We need to help these people. It's a genocide, etc. So I'm not sure if Vivek is going to have a position in the administration, but at least he's going to be a person who is directly involved and who directly knows how to deal with the president. Another one is, of course, Tulsi Gabbard. Again, I'm not sure about her getting any position at Trump administration, but she's been to Artsakh. She has been there. She knows Artsakh. She knows the issue. She has very good Armenian friends, including people in Armenia. So that is why at least three of them are very...
And Suren, it's not impossible because I believe that she left the Democratic Party in 2022.
Yeah. I'm not talking about position in the administration, but maybe she will be some sort of, ambassador somewhere, or maybe some deputy secretary of defense, let's say. Anyways, but she's going to be an influential person. And again, we have very good connections with her, including some people in Armenia know her very well and still are in touch with her. So let's wait and see what's going to happen.
Yeah. Suren, at this point in the campaign, or rather as he's become the president-elect, Trump has talked about winding down every kind of conflict, the Middle East, Armenia, Ukraine, whatever he sees, he doesn't like it at this point in time. And Hovik mentioned a little while ago how China and the U.S. may be going towards a larger confrontation deeper into this century. I'm just wondering if you think that Trump is trying to stamp out all these relatively minor conflicts around the world so that the U.S. can focus its attention and resources on its main adversary of the 21st century.
Yeah, well, the Chinese-American relations are all about trades, are all about business. And Trump is a business person. He thinks about, he has a set of mind, businessman. And of course, he's thinking first of all about it. China is number, I think, first or second trade partner of the United States. Of course, China is very important, but U.S. is a superpower. It can deal with a lot of conflicts, a lot of countries at the same time. It has a lot of resources. It has a lot of tools, including soft powers, to deal with any conflict that they think is important for them to solve or not to solve. So basically, of course, China is going to be high on radar. Is going to be an important issue for the Trump administration. But if they come to an agreement, it's going to be a great cooperation between the two biggest economies in the world, which I suppose Trump wants to do. Because, again, he has this businessman state of mind.
All right. We're going to leave it there today. What a great conversation. Thank you so much, Suren, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm really sorry for not being able to join you for a long period of time.
We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, it's always good to be back to you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Suren.
Thanks.
That's our show today. This episode was recorded on November 7, 2024. We've been talking with Suren Sargsyan, who is the founder and president of the Armenian Center for American Studies, a research center based in Yerevan. For more information on the participants in this episode, check out our show notes at podcasts.groong.org/episode number. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.